Y'all ready for this?
All right, I'm just about ready to jump on an airplane and finally make it home. I've been in Michigan for the last week. I'm sitting in the Dallas airport. Hopefully Nicole can edit this into something that's helpful and useful in your vGroups. We've been talking about some cool stuff. Matthew 25, one of our favorite things, right? Two of the parables that Jesus told, and then finally that prophecy at the end, which we'll get to cover all of it. Just finished the parable of 10 virgins, and really, really good stuff in that. We get to move in now to the parable of the treasure, parable of the bags of gold, and I hope you have a great discussion. I know you can, I know you will, with this parable. Just in general, I'll go ahead and read it through in your groups, but just in general, this is a parable where a master takes his whole treasure and entrusts it to some servants and then leaves town. And I just want to stop right there. NIV uses the word entrusted. I love that word. There's so much honor in that word, entrusted. Imagine if you knew somebody who worked hard all their life, was successful in their career, made a whole bunch of dough, and then handed a bunch of it to you and said, hey, I want to entrust you to invest this. What would that person be saying to you? He would be really lifting you up and honoring you. And so I want us to try that on. The very first week we did vGroups, we talked about the idea that God has called us to take charge. And I had kind of guessed within your groups there might be some of us who would feel uncomfortable about that idea of taking charge. Me? Some of us like to kind of sit in the back row and not cause any waves in our Christian life. And certainly as followers of Christ, we're not supposed to be loud and boisterous and annoying or arrogant or anything. But the idea that we live our life following God and don't have any impact or don't cause any impressions on other people, we just don't see that. And certainly in this parable, we don't see that. Because when the master came back, he called those servants and said, hey, what did you do with what I gave you? And the two that did well, he commended them, he elevated them to a higher position. They got nothing but attaboys and pats on the back and got to receive a reward. But to the one who didn't, it was pretty severe. I think we really have to, in our world, in our life of God's grace and loving God's grace, and He covers our sins, and we get the idea that it's all grace and we're not held accountable for anything. But again and again, Jesus said, no, we will be held accountable. And remember, this whole study is all about being ready, being prepared. That last servant who didn't do anything, I love how the master didn't accept his excuse. He came back and the master found out that the servant did nothing with what he was given, with what he was entrusted. But the guy said, it's because I was afraid of you. You're a severe guy. If I had lost that treasure, I was afraid what you'd do to me. And the master, he doesn't buy it for a minute. He goes, no, it's not that. It's because you're lazy. Because I gave you something to do, I entrusted you, and you just blew it off. You're a wicked, lazy servant. That ought to give us something good to talk about in our groups. God entrusted each one of us with something. And one of the things you might do in your group is kind of look across the circle and you'll see somebody else. Because sometimes gifts and talents and good things that God has given us are easier to see in someone else than we can see in ourselves. You might look across the room and just encourage somebody and say, I see how God has entrusted you. And we can build each other up with that. That'd be a good thing to do in our group. But remember, the other part of that, while it feels good and it sounds good for somebody to say, I see gifts and talents and skills in you, is to realize that comes with the responsibility. Are we using our gifts, our talents? And every one of us have something powerful and crucial within us that God has entrusted us with so that we can go out and help others. Go out to all nations, teaching and baptizing. That's what we're called to do. We'll get into the good stuff of this parable as Pastor Cole talked about in one of his very first sermons at Vision. We're just supposed to double it. We're just supposed to take what God has given us and double it. Man, that ought to give us some good stuff to chew on in our vGroups. What has God entrusted you with? And what are you doing with it? How can we encourage one another to do more with that? Man, if we can do that, if Vision Church was full of people who took that entrusting principle serious, wow, we would reach so many people in our community. That's what I'm praying for. Also praying you have a great group. I'll see you soon. I love you guys.
Y'all ready for this?